Bridget Snell, co-founder and chief editor of the Pink Chair Storytellers magazine. All right. Bridget has spent 2 decades in editorial design and marketing communications for both large media companies and small nonprofit agencies. Her adventures in publishing include managing an award-winning automotive trade magazine as well as a nationally franchised newspaper. Her most memorable assignments were racing a funny car on a Midwest racetrack and traveling to Taiwan to tour automotive aftermarket manufacturing facilities. But the roles closest to her heart were for the nonprofit agencies she worked with that provided aid to low-income and homeless families, at-risk youth, refugees and immigrants, and battered women. At age 47, Bridget and her best friend, Marcy Bracken, began the Waiting Room Media LLC, a multimedia company. They decided to breathe life into a premier empowered women's magazine. Its flagship print publication is Pink Chair Storytellers, a collection of personal essays by and for women and non-binary individuals. BFFs, please join me in welcoming to the podium Bridget Snell to tell us more about her personal story and the power of the Pink Chair Storytellers.
Thank you so much for having me, Pam. Karen and I met earlier this year. Our fathers both live up at the Heights, I like to call it. So this is not her first time listening to me talk about storytelling, which is very near and dear to me. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm very introverted, so I don't think it comes as much of a surprise that I was hoping the entire way here this would be canceled last minute. I'm here to talk about storytelling, and to a group of women who call themselves BFFs. I need no other reason to brush my hair and get in the car. I'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of storytelling as it relates to history telling and recording history. I'd also like to tell you a little bit about my story, and hopefully, if I've done this right, give you enough reason to go home and do some writing of your own. I grew up in the best way on a farm in the Catskills where I found a love of the outdoors, but had few opportunities to see the world past World War I, which still isn't paved. I had to turn to Judy Blume, C.S. Lewis, Madeline L'Engle for life lessons. Margaret taught me that everything changes, especially our bodies, and thank God for that. Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy taught me to have faith in something bigger than myself. Meg Murray taught me that love will guide us through time and space. It's science. But honestly, and I think probably many of you could relate to this, anybody who's read the Phantom Toll movie, Milo and his dog Talk are probably my favorites. Talk, who is his watchdog, reminds us that once there was no time at all, and people found that very inconvenient. They never knew whether they were eating lunch or dinner, and they were always missing trains. And when time was finally discovered, it was inevitably abused. So here I am, 50 years old, and still discovering so much about the world around me, but this time from real people. I'm still learning about time, I'm still learning about love, and thanks to Milo, what a dodecahedron is. So when I pick up an essay or a memoir, I'm learning how the world around me works. I'm able to find a story from someone who lived it. I am old enough now to ask the question, what can I know and how can I find out? What do I know and how do I know it? And this is a seemingly simple guideline. It's one that I employ when I research results on Google. I use this litmus test when I scan bookshelves marked American history or world history or any other niche reference to the past at a library or bookstore. It's important for me to know the source of answers to questions about the past. I have a 14 and a 12-year-old and I ask them to question the source, and that Google is not a source. Save for the library, I find myself scrutinizing sources more today than ever before, and I think at some level we can all relate to this. It's too often that I notice that information that we get about the world that we look for is curated by algorithms on social media, by our purchase histories. Marcy spoke about the collective they. Whoever the collective they are, they put themselves into position to determine what I know by where I was raised, by which school system I was attending, what brands of clothes or hygiene products I buy. Sometimes I wonder how much of a religious or agnostic doctrine or some of the news that I may have bookmarked shades the information I get about the world around me. What do I know and how do I know it? I was at a Barnes & Noble over the weekend, and there was a big display, and it read, "History Today, a selection of the newest and most revelatory books from the best historians, journalists, nonfiction authors, and now in paperback." Here were the books that were on that display. The Greatest Beer Run Ever, A History of the World in 6 Glasses, Masters of the Air, History of the Vikings, Endurance, Devotion, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans, and The Worst Hard Time. That was the display of that signage. And at first sniff, I kind of thought, who decided? Who decided that these were the most revelatory and award-winning and storytelling books? So I had to get closer, and I did. And I studied some of the titles that were familiar to me. The titles, The Greatest Beer Run Ever, is about war. Masters of the Air, World War II. History of the Vikings tells a story about a woman who had her name nearly erased from history, though she was here 500 years before Columbus and was a leader in the Vikings in technology at the time. Stories about Shackleton, Devotion, a story of friendship between 2 men, one black, one white, during a time when white men and black men were not supposed to be friends. The Worst Hard Time is a great story about the greatest migration from the Great Plains during the Great Depression. It's a story about the Dust Bowl, which so many of us don't know about because there wasn't time in our curriculum in history class. And I started realizing that someone really got it when they put this display together. They got it. They realized that history is made up of a collection of stories by the people who lived it, not the ones who wrote the textbooks and decided, this is what we need to know, this is what we're going to teach, everything else we don't have time for. History is by the people who lived it. So someone got it when they put this display together. My unwitting mentor in the art of storytelling is one that everybody I knew not to go on about who he is, LeVar Burton. He is, in his master class, incredible in his explanations of the importance of storytelling and history telling. He says the information we pass on through storytelling goes beyond the content of the story. We are transmitting an inheritance. Stories are the universal language, and he says it's really not rocket science, and you can hear LeVar Burton's voice saying that to us all. It's not rocket science, he says, it's giving away. He goes on to say that storytelling is for the one who is willing to take on the responsibility of bringing the stories. And the stories we tell one another are a foundation, and they set parameters for who we are as people. When you tell your story, you're consciously creating a moment of connection. That's the whole point of storytelling. At some point, and I don't think I need to go into, dig deep or go into an exploration into the when or why, but we started editing history for the sensitivities of others, whoever the others are, probably the sisters of they. This became memorizing dates, memorizing facts, and teaching for testing. So we lost all of the important stuff that comes with history, this stuff. When I was in high school, this is not a story I had originally planned to tell, but I'll tell it. When I was in high school, I remember the day, the evening, that Dan Rather began crying and announcing that Desert Storm had turned into Desert Shield has turned into Desert Storm. And it was, first of all, jarring to see Dan Rather cry. It wasn't the first or second time I'd seen Dan Rather cry, but it was jarring for me as a teenager. It was jarring for me to really wrap my head around what was happening in our world at that time. My parents didn't have a lot of answers for me, so of course I went to school to get them the next day. Social studies class, I raised my hand and asked the teacher, what does this mean? What does this mean for our world? What does this mean for our country? Can you get us a little bit of insight as to how we got here? I'm in high school. I know high school, and then we think we know everything, but now we know we don't. And my teacher turned around and looked at me, and I remember this look, and I don't know how to interpret it to this day. He said, we don't have time. We have a curriculum to cover, we don't have time to talk about current events. I was stunned, I was shocked. There was no persuading him to give me 10 minutes. What I ended up doing was gathering with my classmates and staging a protest the next day. Protests were my thing back in the day. We walked out of class, we sat out the hallway, we refused to move. We were threatened with suspension. I don't even remember everything, it's been 40 years. But eventually, the high school principal gave us the auditorium and a microphone. And so we gathered in there, we set up the bleachers, we got on stage, we passed the mic around. My classmates spoke of siblings who were employed, who were being employed, that they just found out about. They were still absorbing that news. We had questions that we were working out with each other as high school students, living in the same world as the teachers who were at the top of the entranceway, standing in the doorway watching us. And I still think it was unable to participate, but I also wonder how much was unwilling, which is unfortunate. Eventually the press was called, and while my classmates were discussing their personal stories about the war, somehow I ended up working the phones. One of the senators in New York's son started handing me phone numbers and quarters, and I went to the payphone because we weren't allowed to use the office phone. He gave us a mic, but he said no telephone. And somehow I ended up answering a ringing payphone. I still don't know how this happened, but I picked up a ringing payphone, and on the other end was Congressman Sherwood Bowler. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with late 80s, early 90s, but they called him the Green Hornet. He was considered at the time a moderate Republican and a godfather of the environmental political movement that we now still celebrate. So Sherwood Bowler was on the other line and was so wonderful, especially when I called him Senator Bowler. And he said, Bridget, what are you doing? Go back to class. Get your classmates, get back to class. You have so much more to learn. I didn't listen to him. We didn't go back to class. But it was an impression that was made that by using my voice and showing the others in the room that I am part of this story that's happening in the world right now, my experience does count. I would not be dismissed at that time because I looked around me and everybody had something to say about history. And that was a little bit opposite of what I was experiencing. What I discovered later in life is that instead of teaching me what was already in the textbooks, I was told that we don't have time for this because the textbooks are already filled with things I told you you need to know for a test. So my point is this: we're losing this stuff when we stick to the texts that were written by who knows. We're losing the stuff that teaches us the history of the world around us in the perspective of those that lived it. We're missing that connection. That stuff is what creates empathy. That stuff is what makes me understand. I don't have to like how it is, but it makes me understand. And with understanding and connection and empathy comes probably a little bit more peace and maybe being able to sit next to the ones at the table that you thought you would before. While we were memorizing Apollo 11, NASA, the space race, and IBM, we lost the story of Dorothy Vaughan, Catherine Lowell, and Mary Jackson. I was 10, 80 years old when I learned about Lynn Ripplemeyer, who 40 years ago became the first female pilot to fly a 747 and later the first to captain a jumbo across the ocean. She was told at the time that she couldn't do it by her male pilot peers because it would be too difficult physically and psychologically. And the airline chose not to allow this accomplishment to be made public for fear of the backlash for allowing a woman to do such a thing. This is a major accomplishment, the first woman to fly a 747 and a Boeing across the ocean. Just as much of a major accomplishment as Dorothy Vaughan, Catherine Vogel, and Mary Jackson, who really are responsible for some of the science and mathematics that brought Apollo 11 back. We've learned about them in Hidden Figures. Why did it take so long? Let me pause for a second about storytelling and tell you a little bit about my own story, and then we'll come back to the importance of telling your own story. When I was 41, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, mother of 2 young girls, 2 very large Newfoundland dogs, married, actually just celebrated 25 years. Anyone who knows me will tell you I probably could have found this out a decade beforehand, but I was too busy and way too unwilling to admit that I had a problem. But I finally went to the doctor after my hand seized up while I was holding my toddler's little hand walking down the stairs. She was not injured after my hand slipped and let her go, but it shook me enough to finally call the doctor. A series of MRIs and a needle in my spine gave me the reason for the chronic pain, the inexplicable issues with my brain, and the balance problems I was having throughout my life. I know that MS is one of those diagnoses you hear and you think immediately, I know an aunt, I know a friend's mom, my teacher, an actress who has it, and you think she's going to walk funny, she's going to talk funny, she's going to sleep a lot. That wasn't going to work for me. So I spent a year researching treatments that could possibly cure me. There are none. The treatment options presented to me promised very little, but they did also promise a long list of side effects. I spent a year poking needles into my hips and belly, and most injections didn't seem to do more than leave welts. Some days I felt like I was having a heart attack after an injection. Once I had a Reiger's-like episode, left me in bed for a few days. Another time I woke up, I'll never forget this, I woke up sitting on the side of my bathtub speaking to a contractor who somehow got in the house and was installing the shower door. I still don't know how I got there, but it was soon after I had given myself an injection. In 2017, I read about a treatment called HSCT for MS. This is a stem cell transplant, and it's meant to reboot my immune system. This is a treatment that's common in cancer. Anyone who is battling all different kinds of cancer, you may have heard have had a stem cell transplant. It's really a chemo treatment, but it's not used for MS in this country, although it's used for MS in other parts of the world, specifically the most popularly Russia, Mexico, and Israel. So there was a doctor in Chicago, Dr. Berg, he actually treated Selma Blair. He was nearly finished with a trial that he was putting on for the FDA to see if he could get this treatment approved for MS in the United States. So his trial was out of the question. I had to leave the country. I had known a lot about the doctor in Russia. He's reputable, he knew what he was doing, I spoke to a patient. But I had a chance with my sisters to fly down to Atlanta, Georgia, to the International Society of Hematology conference that was happening in Atlanta. There was a doctor there, Dr. Ruiz, who brought his staff to present his findings with some other stem cell transplantation protocols he was working on. And while he was there, he invited some of his some American patients who were considering this treatment at his clinic in Mexico to come and meet him, to hear about the science behind this treatment as it was used for cancer and change for MS. While he was there, he brought in some patients he had treated already from around the country. So not only did I get to meet the actual doctors who would be performing this procedure on me, but I got to meet the patients, one of whom happened to live in the town that I was living on the South Shore. And she was involved in the same karate dojo that Marcy and I met. So I kind of felt that it was kismet that I found this doctor and had to go to Chicago. But in the end, was decided that Mexico is where I was going to go. Here's what I found out about Mexico and the clinic that I was going to. The patients are at private clinics in private apartment buildings that the clinic had built because, as the doctor said, nobody who's sick needs to be in a hospital where all the germs are. So he built beautiful apartments, and he equipped them with special air filters, water filters. He had a cleaning team come in twice a day to make sure that there were no germs still in the air while I was undergoing chemotherapy. I'm not joking, he gave me a staff of 5 people to be with me at all times, someone to drive me if I needed to go anywhere, somebody to give me my shot so I didn't have to, cleaners, an administrator who would make calls for me, help me fill out paperwork if I needed to. I had an entourage. It was incredible. When I did have to leave my apartment, it was to go have chemotherapy, and the rooms had kitchens in them. They were private. There was no curtain separating me or sharing with any of the other patients. I had my own Netflix, so I spent the entire time watching Sherlock on BBC. Wonderful. This was the kind of treatment that I knew if I had to leave my children and my husband for a month, this was going to make it worthwhile. And here's also what I knew. Despite the science that was there, despite the seemingly luxury accommodations, I knew that this was my chance. 70% of the patients who do this treatment were able to halt the progression of their disease. It's not a cure, but it's halting the progression, which is the next best thing. I had a 70% chance of being one of those people. There was a 100% chance that I would get disabled if I did nothing and stuck with the protocol that was given to me. So I felt very confident in this decision. So I went and I told my hematologist, my neurologist, and my oncologist, and this is what I heard. Don't do that treatment, we have drugs to make you comfortable. Wait until you're bound to a wheelchair before you do that. If you go to Mexico, you'll come back with no kidneys. I had to find new doctors, and I did. And I found doctors who shared my need to advocate for myself and find something that was going to help me, not make me wait for the worst to happen, so then I could qualify for some treatment that may or may not work. I have a great team now. I went to Monterey in 2018 for 30 days. My immune system was wiped out with high-dose chemotherapy, because that's where the disease lived. And a fresh immune system was built back from scratch with stem cells taken from my own bone marrow. After 30 days, I was sent home with follow-up instructions. And last month, I celebrated 6 years with a new immune system and no progression, no new disease activity in my brain. My MRIs are coming back stable. So. I'm thrilled to wipe this label from my dust jacket. I much prefer the titles of one-time race car driver, journalist in Taiwan, temporary deckhand on a lobster boat. I did that. I was in charge of putting the little rubber bands on their claws. Nanny, student, editor, writer, wife, mother, sister, friend. MS survivor always seemed a little dramatic for me, and fighter sounds really exhausting. So I'm just taking it off my resume altogether. Or so I thought. A year after I returned, I was interviewed. I was asked about my story for a publication in a major pharmaceutical company newsletter. This newsletter went to doctors and to scientists around the world, and here's part of what it said. Then Bridget stumbled upon autologous hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. That's the long way of saying HSCT. An experimental and controversial procedure that uses the patient's own stem cells to try to halt the progress of the disease. The FDA has not approved this procedure, and last year issued a warning about unapproved stem cell therapies. Despite the lack of established science, Snell weighed her options and decided she would undergo the procedure at Clínica Ruiz in Puebla, Mexico, which boasts one of the largest volume of cases in the world using the procedure to treat MS. But a positive outcome is far from assured. Often you can't get a good sense of what the quality of treatment is in another country, one doctor said. Adding, many companies promise procedures whose results have not been clinically Unfortunately, people are very easily persuaded by hope. Unfortunately, a lot of medical travel facilitators mislead their clients by advertising beach holiday packages and the like. Post-op is really about quiet recovery inside for a few days. Being out in the sun is not desirable. And the headline of that article was about medical tourism. My story that I told you first became the story they told. My advocacy, the research I did, my determination, the travel, the interviews that I did with doctors and patients, more than I've ever done for any doctor, even the one who took my daughter's adenoids out, whose name I don't even remember. But I found this, I told my story. I was so proud of the validation I got in my MRI test results. But still, my story was dismissed. I was used as a cautionary tale about liability and paperwork and legal matters. There was very little in the article about actually the treatment helping the disease. But I found a cure after I got over my anger. I found a cure about story theft. And that cure is Pink Chair Storytellers magazine. Pink Chair Storytellers magazine is one of the products of the waiting room media that Marcy and I founded. This was pre-COVID. We were sitting together in the waiting room dojo where our kids had karate class together. And somehow, Marcy saw me sitting there, bald, with a mask on. It was obvious that I had just had chemotherapy. This was pre-COVID, so the mask was still kind of looked strange on people. But small talk that happened before my procedure became deeper. Marcy and I struck up a friendship that many of us find earlier in life, but we were fortunate to have found later in life. It was based on authenticity, honesty, not being afraid of being who we are, not looking or being afraid of judgment, telling it like it really is. The metal chairs that we sat in week after week were very uncomfortable, so we changed our icon to big, fluffy pink chairs, which you'll find on the cover of every magazine. The stories that we have put out to our readers, we know that they are having an impact. Our readers tell us. One of our readers wrote a note after she read the story of Katerina, who lived as a man for most of her life, and decided to make that very difficult decision, and had been living as a woman on the outside as well for about 5 years, told her story. And this woman emailed me and said, I have nothing to do with the transgender story, but every single thing that this woman said about the struggle she had in her life, not living her authentic self, every word that she said about making these decisions to be authentic struck me, and now I've made the decision that I'm going to change my life too, and I'm going to fight this disease that my doctors told me I didn't have. This was from one of our readers. I was stopped on the sidewalk when a woman told me that she passed on one of the issues to her best friend who was secretly getting a divorce and had felt shame about it. And one of the stories struck her as something that this woman needed to hear, that she wasn't alone. We have one of our Marcy and I's first storytellers told me a story that really hit home for me because we're the same age. I was from the north, she's from the south. She's a black woman, I'm a white woman, we're the same age, we lived at the same time. She had a very, very different life than I did. The privilege that I felt while she told her story was incredible, and there were things that I finally understood because I listened to her, and I know that that story had the same impact on our readers. And that's what I'm talking about with authentic storytelling. That's what LeVar Burton is talking about when he's discussing storytelling. It is a way to pass on our legacies. It is a way to make connection, and it's the only way that we can truly know about the history of the world that we live in. So when you're thinking of writing your story, It's very important to decide before you start your story what your intention with it is. Are you here to make me laugh about the trauma that you had so that I can understand that right now? Are you here to tell your story for social justice? Are you here to just tell your story because it's the first time and you needed to get it out? We're here, we're that safe space. And that is the second thing about Pink Chair Storytellers that has made quite an impression on our readers. We are a safe space. We do protect you. We do not allow others to tell your story. If you tell your story in Pink Chair Storytellers as a first person essay, we don't allow people to write. People pitch me all the time, I have a story I'd like to write about so-and-so. She was a pioneering woman. Well, why don't you have her call me? She can tell her story. We don't take narratives here at Pink Chair Storytellers. And if I need to, I pull out of my pocket the article that was written about me that was completely inaccurate, and I use that as an example, and I hope you keep that story in mind when you decide how to write your story and who should tell it. We publish 3 times a year. First magazine of the year is the identity issue. It's the I Am issue. That's the issue, the number 7, that's sitting on your table right now with Candy O'Terry. Is anyone from Massachusetts? So you're familiar with Candy O'Terry. Candy is a breast cancer survivor and used Pink Chair Storytellers to tell her story for the first time. We're very honored and humbled by that. As you look throughout the magazine, you'll also know those regular columnists that are in each issue. We make sure that every woman is represented in our magazine. So we have a columnist who is an immigrant who tells her story. We have a brand new columnist who talks from the LGBTQ community. She brings a voice to that community because it's so often not told. We have a woman who speaks of being included. She's a multi-ethnic columnist, a woman, and writes about how she grew up without a father for a while because he was deported by ICE, and so what that means for her growing up in the country where your father was deported. We soon will have a new columnist. She's one of my favorite people I've ever met, and she started the Desi Moms Network for women in Western Massachusetts who have a child on the autism spectrum. So she's writing from the point of view of a Desi mom and a special needs mom. You will find yourself in every page of Pink Chair Storytellers, and you will learn something about the world around you didn't know before. And the next time that you're out there and you meet someone that you thought you had nothing in common with or had no connection with, or just simply didn't have any interest in, I know that when you read some of these stories, you're going to go, oh, okay, all right, that's how it works. I understand now. I don't necessarily need you to believe or agree, but understanding, that's what we do at Pink Chair Storytellers magazine. And that's how I feel about storytelling.
Oh, I'd love to.
Does anybody have any questions for Bridget? Pretty amazing story itself, right? Anyone?
Yes, I'll publish your story.
I think her own personal stories will be amazing. She's gone through some personal things and what led her to develop this Strong Women's magazine. I was just looking at some of the photos, it's pretty impressive. And that Candy O'Terry put her stamp on it as a powerful storyteller, as a woman that I've followed for a long time too, who shares women's stories all over. I want to. Yes.
Yeah. So if a woman wants to tell her story, but she's not really sure how to get started or how to structure it or how to frame it, what would you recommend?
Coming to one of our storytelling and writing workshops. Or calling me, or emailing me. One of my favorite methods of storytelling is to just pick up a phone, put it on the audio file setting, and just start talking as if your best friend or your mother or your dad or your child are sitting in front of you. And how when your kid runs in the door like, Mom, you never think this will happen today? I was sitting in the cafeteria, that's how you should tell your story. That's your cadence, that's your voice. Sentence structure, secondary. Nobody wants to hear a story from someone who pulled out of a source and tried to find the biggest word. That's not you. Your story should be reflective of your voice. So pick up a phone or a recording device, get on Zoom, just talk to yourself. And then transcribe it, and then we'll work together on making it into an essay.
Great question. Do we have any storytellers in this room? Oh, I see one hand up. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you a question in regards to your treatment.
Yes.
And I know this might sound like a personal question, but, there are a lot of people who get diagnosed with things and don't necessarily have the financial means to do something like you did. So, were you in a position to be able to do that, or do you have to sacrifice a lot of different things to be able to go?
There are sacrifices, but there's a lot more sacrifices if you say, I can't do it because of money. There are thousands of people who travel to Russia and Mexico from this country, even though the country now, by the way, offers this treatment. Their protocols are slightly different. They were so anti-stem cell transplant. By the way, part of that story that I really hated the most in that newsletter was that she called it a stem cell therapy. There's a very big difference between this transplant and a stem cell therapy. And I do not have therapy. My cells are fine, they don't need therapy. But there are thousands of people that go and they spend a year fundraising. They will come mow your yard, they'll send their kids, they'll have an event. Sometimes insurance companies will work with you because the amount of money it takes to treat someone in this country with MS. You have to see your neurologist twice a year, sometimes three. I take infusions every 6 months just to maintain the work that this treatment did. So it's 2 whole days a year sitting in an infusion chair. The medicine they give me, the monoclonal antibody, is very expensive. Then there's the MRI machines. There are years that I have had 7 MRIs in 1 year. The disease is not progressed, but I still have it. If I had a tumor in my body, this treatment made sure that the tumor got no bigger. It didn't go away, so I still have it, if that makes sense. So I still have to do maintenance, and insurance will cover that, but insurance will cover somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 a year to treat this disease in the United States. Nowhere near that to go to the clinic that I went to, get top-class treatment from world-class doctors. My doctor, this doctor in Mexico, is a Mayo Clinic distinguished alumni. He invented stem cell bone marrow transplantation for people with leukemia in the 80s. He's top-notch. So yes, that's a long, circuitous way to get to your answer. Yes, it costs a lot of money, but nowhere near the cost if it were here in this country, and nowhere near the cost of not doing anything. Like I said, 70% chance of disease slowing down, 100% chance of the disease stopping me altogether. There was just no question.
Anybody else? Can we give a huge round of applause for Bridget? And I dare to say that continue to find opportunities to get in front of people to share your story. It's a powerful one. So thank you. Who knew that a meeting that my father recommended me to come down and listen to was fortuitous that we met, but I'm so glad we did.
Your father's a cool guy.
He's got good taste. He's got good taste. Yeah. Before we conclude today, I just want to tell you what's coming up next. Please note that our next BFF program is on June 11th. We'll be right here, same time, same back channel, 11:30 to 1:30. We're not quite ready to announce the speaker, but we'll be sure to get that out to you soon. And then we're going to go a little pink ourselves, and that's going to be on August 6th. It is our 4th annual summer social of the BFFs. It's going to be at Tagliano's from 5 to 7:30. This is our summer social with good food, drinks, and I promise some great networking fun. In the spirit of that fun, I as I said, we're going pink. It will be a Barbie-themed event that will provide a fun and dynamic way for all of us to get to know each other. Last year, we had a beach blanket bingo, so this year, we're gonna go Barbie. So we'll share more what that's gonna look like, but I promise you, it's always a good time, and it's a great way to meet other women in a very relaxed atmosphere. And on Wednesday, September 25th, we're back here for our 5th annual Ladies Golf Clinic and Outing. This sells out every year. It's from 9:30 to 4. What I love about this event, if you've never played golf before, this is the place to start to learn. So you have a clinic, and then you have lunch, and play 9 holes of golf, and it doesn't matter if you're a great golfer. It's camaraderie, enjoying, learning the game, seeing this as something that you might want to do in the future. And as we know, men do business on the golf course. Women can do business on the golf course too. I love to share the story that Pam Stevens, our founder of BFF, wanted to learn the gift of golf. I learned the game of golf, fell in love with it her first time that we had the clinic, and now bought clubs and plays on a regular basis. Are you getting any better, Pam? But like we said, it doesn't matter. It's such a great time. And women are so supportive because we're not competitive. It's not a tournament, it's an outing. And so we will be sure to share more information when registration is open for that. And finally, it is tradition that we give away a bottle of wine because we are women and we like our bottle of wine or maybe a glass of wine here and there. And followed by that, I want to meet you all in the back right-hand corner of that room to take a photo with our BFFs, with our storytellers today so that we can post it out on our own social media. And the winner of today's wine is Anjali I butchered this.